been one of the most hottest topics of all time, especially in schools and work environment. Although, with time, people have grown and evolved, the color line still somewhere divides us. In the recent years, the most visible evidence of this in the public arena has been the persistent attack on affirmative action in higher education and employment. From the perspective of many Americans who believe that versatiles of discrimination have been disappeared, affirmation action now provides an unfair advantage to the minorities. From the perspective of others who daily experience the consequences of ongoing discrimination, affirmative action is needed to protect opportunities likely to evaporate if affirmation obligation is to be done. As Hardy, Logan and Pamela explain, there are a range of policies and practices that continue to disadvantage black individuals and communities throughout the US, impacting areas including public education, which has often been underfunded in African American majority schools, limiting skills and upward mobility for black Americans. Employment discrimination, which makes it more difficult for black families to escape from poverty and build a wealth in their community. The social safety net system, where there is an increased likelihood in sanctioning and spending in less journals of black community. Regardless of education levels obtained, these racial disparities continue to exist. Diversity in higher education has made improvements over the years, but is still not accessible to all, primarily due to cost. The National Center of Education Statistics, founded in 2017, says that 41% of white young adults were enrolled in college compared to 36% of black and Hispanic young adults. Additionally, for Americans over 25 years of age, 33% of whites have a bachelor's degree compared to 19% of blacks and 16% of Hispanics.
Why black home ownership matters. Home ownership has been the most effective way that Americans build wealth, which can be passed down from generation to generation. It also stabilizes communities, provides access to education and access to employment opportunities. However, not all Americans have had an equal opportunity to build wealth through home ownership. Historical discrimination through exclusionary housing policies and practices, plus a dwindling supply of housing and variety of other factors, have limited black families from purchasing homes at the same rate as their white counterparts. For the entire 2010s, California's black home ownership rate has been lower than it was in the 1960s, when it was completely legal to discriminate against black home buyers. The 2019 statistics show that just 41% of black families own their homes compared to 68% of white families. In a year of many anniversaries, two in particular stand out with respect to the housing crisis facing the United States today. The first is the passage of Title 8 of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, more commonly known as the Fair Housing Act. In some ways, the legislation bitterly acknowledged the role of housing discrimination in keeping African Americans in a subordinate social position, excluding black people from white neighborhoods while simultaneously disinvesting in black communities, has kept them out of the best funded schools and highest paying jobs. Housing discrimination was a linchpin of black inequality in American society, and the Fair Housing Act held out the promise of undoing it by banning racial discrimination in the renting, financing, and selling of housing. In one of the most concentrated investigations of discrimination by real estate agents in the half century since enactment of America's landmark Fair Housing Law, Newsday found evidence of widespread separate and unequal treatment of minority potential home buyers and minority communities on Long Island. The 3-year probe strongly indicates that housing hunting in one of the nation's most segregated suburbs poses substantial risk of discrimination, with black buyers chancing disadvantages almost half of the time they enlist brokers. Additionally, the investigation reveals that Long Island's dominant residential brokering firms help solidify racial separations. They frequently directed white customers towards areas with the highest white representations and minority buyers to more integrated neighborhoods. They also avoided businesses in communities with overwhelmingly minority populations.
Black people have been facing unemployment issues since the very beginning. They have been forced into slavery, labor work, and low-paid jobs. They are provided with very less job opportunities, nil benefits, and very, very low pay scales. The racial discrimination has put forward barriers against quality jobs. They face these discriminations everywhere. Even in the labor market, their fellow white workers are paid 1,000 times more, even if they are at the same position, or sometimes even if they are at a higher position. The labor market has been historically worse for the black people and it continues till today. There are many factors which contribute to it, such as riots and violent oppression acts. However, today there have been people who are protesting against it thanks to all the social media accounts and pages. This is practically possible due to the trans media, and hopefully it will definitely bring out a change. A lot of companies employ black people in order to market themselves as socially diverse. However, this is far from the truth. The treatment given is worse. However, during these times, there are whistleblowers who help empower these situations and bring it to light through social media platforms.
Police brutality. Racism affects individuals, groups, institutions, and systems. Racial and historical trauma beginning at the time of colonization in the United States has had profound effects on Black and Indigenous communities. Racial discrimination can induce stress and frustration and adversely affect mental and physical health. The Black Lives Matter movement might be the largest social justice movement in United States history. The profound and continued systemic inequities and injustices towards Black people and communities have been observed with the recent deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Elisha McClain, and many other Black people in the United States. Young Black men have a 1 in 100 chance of being killed by police over the life force, and police involved killings are the sixth leading cause of death among young Black men. The United States is experiencing an increase in reported hate crimes following the 2016 presidential election. Nationwide and internationally, people are having tough conversations about race and racism. If we know racial violence and police brutality are significantly impacting individuals, families, and communities of color, do we have an ethical obligation to address racial stress and violence? The Black Lives Matter movement was developed based on the ongoing experiences of racial stress and trauma toward Black individuals and communities. In 2013, three queer Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created the Black Lives Matter movement in response to the murder of Trayvon Martin and the countless other acts of state-sanctioned violence towards Black people in the United States. The movement has expanded beyond addressing police brutality and addresses other forms of systemic inequities, including criminalization of Black youth in schools and gentrification in historically Black communities. The movement for Black Lives lists a number of policy reform efforts centered on racial, ethnic disparities, defunding law enforcement, and reparations. The Black Lives Matter movement follows in the footsteps of the 1960s civil rights movement in creating a call to action for systemic change and an end to anti-Black racism. Racist violence against has marked American society since the colonial period, beginning with the treatment of Native Americans and then African Americans. The violence directed against minority groups by both law enforcement and private citizens has included beatings, lynchings, and today's shooting of unarmed Black people by police officers, and in some cases, private citizens. In recent years, a number of high-profile killings have prompted heated public debate, a number of criminal cases, and the rise of activist groups such as Black Lives Matter. Police killings raise important ethical as well as legal and political issues related to common good, including the use of profiling, the responsibilities of police officers, the meaning and value of public order, gun control, and implicit bias. In recent years, we have seen countless protests against the police and killing of Black Americans by police. Reflection on the Black Lives Matter movement leads us to a fundamental question about the justification of policing in a democratic state. We want to say, of course, that all lives matter, but the issue being brought to the force by Black Lives Matter movement is that time and again, Black lives do not matter. Blacks appears to have been killed by police, and there have been few, if any, repercussions for the police officers involved, even when it would appear to the observer that the use of lethal force was unnecessary. The issue thus is not just the loss of Black lives, but the fact, there are no consequences for those who take those lives if they are police officers. Added that is the perception by many, especially in black communities, that the police are more of an occupying army than persons sworn to serve and protect the residents themselves. This perception leads to fundamental questions about the justification of policing and the proper limits of police power and authority.
So, what is racism? Racism is a conceptual reality. It's a myth and it's a lie. Now, there are three forms of racism that we observe in sports. One is institutional, one is systematic, one is symbolic, and another one is overt. So, what is overt racism? Overt racism is everything that is considered to be illegal. Making monkey sounds, or throwing food at a player, or calling him the N-word, or any kind of racial slur in a very derogatory way is an overt form of racism, which is a crime in mostly every country. Now, other two forms of racism is institutional or systematic racism. Institutional systematic racism is to keep minorities in a minority in like any organization. Now, you would say, Aryan, black players are in majority in almost every sport. Yes, but the systematic or institutional racism happens in the background stuff. They don't hire enough black physios. They don't have enough black coaches. And this is observed across all sports. Like a sport like basketball, which is called as a black man sport, apart from Doc Rivers and other one or two black coaches, everyone else is white. Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich. So if you observe this, these trends are very prevalent. And institutional racism is also a part of sports. It is also more predominantly it's housing and employment, but sports in the background stuff is very, very prominent. Now, what is symbolic form of racism? Symbolic form of racism is, I think, the most common in sports, because this form of racism can be, it's intertwined with common sense, with my personal opinions, and you say these things to get off it. And if I was to react on it, people would call me, Aryan, you're being oversensitive. Like, I'll give you an example. Harry Kane comes on Gary Neville's podcast and prices himself out for a move. He's an England star and a Spurs legend, and he wants to leave Spurs to win trophies. And people say it's fair. People say he should be leaving it. People are backing Harry Kane to leave Spurs. But when Paul Pogba's agent comes out and says the same thing, he doesn't price himself out for a move. But he says the same thing. His agent has said this, and over here Harry Kane has said this. But because Paul Pogba's agent said it, people slag Paul Pogba off. He's called a disgrace, he's called an embarrassment. Whereas when Harry Kane does this, people call him a saint. That's very funny when you think about it. It's not like funny in the sense, it's very, people are hypocrites in that regard. We are seeing Graham Souness when Harry Kane scores, gives 4 assists. Graham Souness is saying, oh, he's what a fantastic player. But when Paul Pogba does this, it's expected by him. So I'm not trying to say you should be treating Harry Kane the same way you should be treating Paul Pogba. I want Paul Pogba to treat him the way that Harry Kane is, because I think a World Cup winner, French international, deserves that kind of respect. So the Paul Pogba and Harry Kane situation is still very recent, but this is happening in English football for a long, long time. Let's just take an example of 2011 case of Luis Suarez using derogatory racist terms on Patrice Evra. And when he was fined and suspended for it, Liverpool fans and players came out wearing the shirt saying, "Justice for Luis Suarez." And we are backing racism. There are England legend and a Chelsea legend, John Terry, has been known for making racist comments. He's not even apologetic for it. He's made those comments, he's still not willing to apologize, and is still considered as a national treasure. But Aryan, you're only talking about English culture. Yes, but this is not just England, right? When you talk about USA, right? Jackie Robinson, who was the first all African American player to play in a National Basketball League, alright? And when he joined, there were teammates who denied to play with him. There were opposition who were trying to find every chances to hurt him. And then there were players who were making monkey sounds and were calling him the N-word. There's the same thing that happened in Italy. The fans have been as crucial, as critical as, they were with Jackie Robinson in the USA. People have called black players in Italy with N-words, they have used monkey chants, and these patterns are prevalent everywhere across the globe. And which is a very sad thing to hear, but what is media doing about it? When ex-players like Graham Souness can be openly criticized Paul Pogba the way he does, but when the same thing is done by a white player, he backs it. How are we allowing? There was an NBC documentary which was made about how black players are better at sports. They have higher agility, they have higher pace, they have higher strength. But when put to research, when there was genuine research conducted on it, no medical studies, no significant article, or no significant form of research backs it. There's not one shred of evidence that completely backs the claim made by the documentary by NBC. And Yes, there are advantages to some players, but that advantages are based on gender based and not based on your ethnicity, which is very sad because, see, as long as media keeps pushing out the narrative, keeps being overtly racist to get more clicks, to get higher TRP, we cannot expect the general masses to improve, right? Like if you see the Sun has been known to make one of the most racist and controversial headlines to sell the newspapers. You can research it. Just research racist or controversial headlines by the Sun, or research Raheem Sterling and the Sun, research Marcus Rashford and the Sun. Use any black English football player's name and put the Sun next to it and you will see the results. The headlines are excruciatingly bad and I'm laughing because the thing is, it's my sense of coping mechanism. When I see something that's bad, I let out a laugh, and that's an involuntary response for me. But this situation is truly horrific. A black player buys a house, and then you are leading in a way a charioteer who raised so and so money buys $2 million house, which implies that the charioteer might have taken the money out of the charity, which was actually the incident with Marcus Rashford. This headline was true. But when a white player buys a house, then the headlines say, "Oh, Man City starlet buys a house for his mother." Why is there a difference? I'm not asking the white players to be treated as the black players. Far from it. Treat the black players like you treat the white players. Because we need to get this institutional form of racism, systematic racism, out of our system. Because of these incidents, we are provoking people. Like in America, in I think 2011, there was a notion to make an all-white basketball league. How ridiculous is that? America is a country where they had a Negro baseball league. How ridiculous is that? In your own country, you're divided because of your color. Even in as pure thing as sports. Sports for me and for many other people across the world is something which is religious, which is like a religion to us. And when we see this kind of racism, it sickens me to my core, and I can't put it in any other way. Because we are looking at systematic racism. We are looking at overt racism. The monkey chants. Ian Wright, an Arsenal legend, was racially abused by a teenager on social media who was an Arsenal fan. What has the days come to, and I still can't believe it. And I still think that media is playing a born and a boon kind of a role over here, because when you look at this, media is also the reason why there are most black players, why black players are the majority in sports right now. Because when you hear these players, they see, because of the media documentary, the way they glorify these players, it inspires young people. It inspires young black citizens from broken neighborhoods and says that we can, make our lives better. It is our way out, because there's so many great examples in sports, with black or colored minorities, than there are in lawyers and doctors or any other profession. That's why there's a cultural overload in sports of black players, and that leads to even racism. Because when you look at fans, if you perform well, you're the best player in the world. But if you have one bad game, and then all of a sudden you're a disgrace and embarrassment, the tolerance limit of a fan, how much will they tolerate in terms of a bad performance, depends on the color of your skin, and that is very, very, very sickening. Which is the most unsports-like. It's very sad. One of the questions I get asked more often is, Aryan, why do you talk so much about racism? Why do you talk so much about Black Lives Matter? We are in India, it doesn't really bother us. Well, it does. Systematic racism is very prevalent in India. Even stereotyping is called as systematic racism. It's a form of it. We are using N-words blatantly without thinking twice. How is that not a form of racism? Yes, well, our cases aren't as bad. Overt cases aren't as bad as they are in India, but then we have different kind of racism. We have casteism, which is just as bad as color discrimination, Anyways, recent studies have proven that Bollywood is one of the biggest catalysts for racist thoughts and racist ideologies in India. Well, there are actors who have, who are promoting fairness creams, and the fairness cream ads are showing, if you're not fair skin, then you are basically not doing the right things in your life. You won't get your promotions, you won't go ahead in life, and that is pretty sad. But unless media comes up with a structural change, yes, the change is coming, but we need to go faster. Racism has existed for a very, very long time, and it should not have to exist anymore. That's all I'm trying to say. But then it's not just about the mainstream media, right? It's also about the social media. And what we are trying to say, what we're seeing nowadays, especially in context of sports, is that a lot of abuse, a lot of hate that you get, even racist comments, are on social media. And it's usually after a game, after a bad performance, or after an interview or a statement that anyone makes that you don't like, and people just go nuts. We can't put all the blame on the mainstream industry, because the thing is, in reality, even the cultural overload that we see in sports today is because of the mainstream industry. because of the glorification of the minorities, they have provided a way out to these minority people from these ethnic minorities to make their lives better. And they've inspired the generation of people, and they cultivated a new trend amongst the families where they care more about going to national finals than getting a PhD. That's a fact, right? But the thing is, we have to touch upon the social media aspect. The social media aspect is so crucial because people like George Floyd, especially George Floyd, wouldn't have got his justice if it wasn't for social media. And we know it with the president because there's so many people who have been racially abused even before him and have died for far lesser crime than even George Floyd has, but they haven't got justice. But George Floyd's case will set a precedence for the betterment of life of many black people in USA. And the movement was crucial because it wouldn't have happened without the involvement of the social media, people across the world chiming in to help him out. But social media is also a place where we see the most hate crimes committed towards any player. One bad performance, one bad interview, and he's slacked off. And it's so bad that it's a form of overt racism, which is essentially crime in many countries. But what we're seeing today is, a lot of these crimes, a lot of the hate crimes are committed by 13 to 14-year-olds. They are minors who have found a way to create an account on Twitter and Instagram, and they want to get their opinions out there. I don't know what is it that makes them go so overt about it. I don't know what is it that they want to commit say such harsh things to any human being. Maybe it's a rebellious teen phase, or maybe it's because you want to fit into a world. I don't know what it is. But we have seen the players like legend like Ian Wright being racially abused by an Arsenal fan who happens to be a 13-year-old is completely embarrassing. So Premier League clubs, especially Premier League and Premier League clubs, have tried to have given a suggestion to Twitter that you have a verification in place. Let the people link the government document, official government document, so there's no anonymity because many people hide behind anonymity and express the freedom of speech, unregulated freedom of speech to produce more hate in the space, and this is harming players worldwide. So they have come with a suggestion that we remove the anomaly element and everyone's account has to be verified. The documents are to be there. So if anyone does something like this, it's easier to prosecute. Now I get the entire digital privacy thing, and I know that if you remove the anomaly element and you give your government documents, how can it negatively hurt you? But this is the best solution that we have in the space today. And obviously I'll be open to better solutions, and I don't think this is the best way forward. But if the condition doesn't improve, if we see more 13-year-olds or anybody giving such a level of hate crimes to any human being from any minority across any part of the world, I think that could be the only way forward. Because be it social media or be it in real life, there is absolutely no good reason to treat any human being like the way black athletes are treated for any bad performance or a bad interview, or for a hair color, or for dancing at his own brother's wedding, for God's sake. I think, or having a tattoo, because this is completely inhuman, and I rest my case.